Thank you. My name is Joe Fuller. I run two projects at Harvard about how work is evolving. We're all just trying to keep our own jobs at Harvard these days, so this is a topic near and dear to our hearts. So I'm going to talk about the impact of AI on entry-level jobs. And AI is certainly showing up more and more in job postings. You can see that there's been a dramatic growth in the percentage of jobs referring to AI relative to the normal market that doesn't. Now this is, of course, this isn't just generative AI. AI was on your phones in 2014, just not what we all talk about today with ChatGPT and Grok and all that stuff. Now how is this going to affect entry-level jobs? There are kind of two schools of thought. One school of thought is called the reallocation-driven labor force, which is really spoken to, described by my friend Eric Brynjolfsson at Stanford. He says there's going to be a lot of disruption in jobs, but don't worry, over time, people reallocate themselves in directions where they can have work, presumably because they want to eat and have a roof over their head. But there are a bunch of jobs that are going to get disrupted and or downsized or reconfigured. The second, actually more associated with people like Jamie, who we heard earlier this morning, is don't worry, this is going to augment everyone, make them more productive, but we're not going to have a big reallocation. Do we know which one of those is true? Well, let's start with Eric. This is actually Eric's data, pre-generative AI, looking at customer service representatives and asking pre-AI and post-AI, what happened to their productivity? And what you can see, interestingly, on the right-hand side is there were two effects. The average session they got done in an hour did increase materially, but as you can see on the right, newer employees got much more productive. So if you think about the task of a customer service representative, an experienced employee who's done this for 2 or 3 years kind of knows the Pareto of what you're going to get asked and knows those policies through repetition. A new one doesn't. So 33% improvement in the productivity of first-year call center reps, 14% improvement in the productivity of experienced call center reps. That would really suggest that Eric's onto something. So if I can speed up your workforce, especially in a high turnover job like customer service rep, by somewhere between 15 and 35%, you're not going to just take all that so they can have longer coffee breaks. You're going to reduce the number of call center reps you have. What about software engineers? So 71% of organizations report that they are using some sort of enhancement, AI-driven enhancement in their software running operations. That could be Claude Code, underlying tools like Cursor, Copilot, which you're all familiar with. That makes productivity of junior software engineers, called individual contributors usually in a software company, about 39% more efficient. Senior software engineers are saying they're 48% more productive. So once again, that would suggest that we're going to have a big reduction in the number of software engineers hired. And in fact, the unemployment rate for CS, computer science graduates, today from the last 2 classes is 50% higher than the unemployment rate for their classmates from other disciplines. It's about 6.4% versus 4.2%. So that would suggest something. Add with this data. What you can see here is for those 2 jobs, there's a marked decline in the blue line, which is early career hires, ages 22 to 25. You can see almost no difference in the senior positions. This, by the way, is very consistent with some of the data that Indeed has out on the tables there. So this is really boring in on classic office jobs and middle-level people like individual contributors in computer science. So that should be game, set, match, right? Eric wins, Jamie loses, and I can finish a few minutes early. It's not that easy. We always try to make things as complicated as we can at Harvard because it makes us feel good about ourselves. But in any case, so let me complicate the situation. So this is work we did at the Harvard Business School working with the Boston Consulting Group with their pool of people called analysts. An analyst is a recent graduate of a college, usually selective, demanding college. These are very hard to jobs to get, at least while they still exist. And we asked them to do in-frontier tasks, we call it. An in-frontier task is something AI ought to be good at. Now, they got a marked increase in their productivity, about 40% increase in the quality of the work they did, about 25% increase in the quantity of the work they did in the same period. But we asked them to tell us the performance rating on their work that the analysts in these two samples took. And think about the left-hand side as the 25th percentile performers, and the right-hand side is the 75th percentile performers. How much was their improvement when they got the AI? Well, with the top 75%, you can see a 17% improvement. If I went to most of your organizations and say, I can make your high performers 17% more productive, for $1 million, if you're smart, you're going to ask me, well, what do I get for $2 million? Right? But look at the difference for the 25th percentile performers. Over 40% increase in the quality of their work. So AI is a great leveler. Now let's remember these analysts, that we're not comparing sumo wrestlers with marathoners. They're all marathoners. They're all very bright, hardworking kids. So presumably that performance difference is there for certain forms of analysis, or their self-confidence in doing some form of analysis, or maybe even the initial managers they had in the firm weren't as effective in onboarding them and getting them productive. Could be lots of different variables there. But this begins to support Jamie Teven's proposition, that this can be a great augmentation to make people more productive, happier in their work, presumably, because BCG is an intensely internally competitive place. I know that because I used to run one of their big competitors. So this suggests that it's neither one or the other, as does my analysis. So this is work I did with Matt Sigelman and Burning Glass Institute. He and I publish a lot together. If you don't know Burning Glass Institute, you should. So what we found in our analysis, now these charts are look deceptively similar, but they're saying different things. On the left-hand side, you can see the gray line is the path to being productive in a job before AI. And the red line above it is how productive you get when augmented by AI. Let's call that the Jamie chart. What it shows in 17% of the jobs in the United States, that the adoption of AI makes people more productive faster. And it does that in large part by automating or speeding up, augmenting certain types of jobs, certain types of tasks within the job that are often difficult to do. They require some special training, some special educational background, some kind of credential. If the AI does that, what it does is broaden the number of candidates who are going to be qualified for the job. Because suddenly I don't have to be a stats wizard to do the job because the AI does all that. So in some instances, entry-level jobs will be made more available to people, and I would argue more pleasant for those people, because often AI, the first thing it displaces is the most boring, routine, repetitive tasks, which are rules-based and for which there's a lot of data. That's what it's actually super good at right now. But on the right-hand side, we've got the Eric chart. There are a number of jobs which are the application of rules to big data sets, where AI is immediately substantially more economical to rely on than the human being. A good example of that type of job is credit analyst. If you give people credit and you have a formula for assessing their credit worthiness, and you have a lot of longitudinal data about who's a good credit and who's a bad credit and this person, I don't need a human in the loop until later. Look at eventually the AI proficiency is surpassed by the persons. And this is going to create, as we'll see in a second, a problem for organizations going forward. Because you can't have a 5-year-old if you didn't have a 1-year-old. And of course, you don't want the 16-year-old you get later, but that's a different problem. Now, one of the major problems in the discussion of the impact of generative AI on work is it's too static. We keep talking about this job right now is getting affected. That job right there is getting affected. It's an extremely dynamic technology that's improving faster than we thought. And this is a test that ChatGPT created for 220 skills in about 44 different jobs. And what they do is they give, this is in frontier type work, something generative AI should be good at. And they have humans do the work, and they have AI do the work, and they mix those two together, and they give experts with at least 15 years of experience in doing that task both work products and say which one's better. They don't tell them which one's AI and which one's human. So if you had a score of 50, it would mean basically random selection, that you can't tell them apart. And what we can see here is that Claude is almost at 50. And look at the difference between ChatGPT 4 at 12.5 and ChatGPT 5 at 38. So go back to the Jamie and Eric chart, the two graphs. Those lines are going to move because this thing is getting better. This is the first technology that gets better by itself. And if that doesn't creep you out, you must love horror movies. So how is all this going to affect the structure of companies? What I'm about to show you is unpublished research. It will be published, I hope, later this year, depending on whether I can finally explain it to the editor at the Harvard Business Review in a way they can understand what I'm talking about. So as any fool can plainly see, oh, I'm sorry. What we did, I'm doing this work with Accenture Research. What we did was build maps of 6 industries. What does the current organization look like relative to the distribution of personnel at 6 different levels, from leadership to entry-level jobs? And I call this the geometry of these organizations. And you can see for these 6 different industries, they vary. Some are kind of similar, like banking and software platforms look kind of similar on the left. Similarly, healthcare, that's hospitals and healthcare fulfillment, and advanced manufacturing, for some reason, look kind of similar. But they both look unlike retail and transportation and logistics. And if you start thinking about this as a map of where people deployed, if you're going to think about the future of organizations, you have to ask, when you map the potential of generative AI to make these positions more productive, what is that geometry going to look like? That's what it's going to look like. So here we have a model of how much more productive workers are going to be across the economy because of generative AI. And everyone keeps building these models, including me. I built one with Accenture. But and the good news is, we finished, and it's really cool, and everyone's getting the same numbers. So we don't need to build any more of these. It's always between the high 30s and the mid 40th percentiles. Our model says 41. I'm going to go with my model because it's mine. At each level of the organization here, from left to right, you can see the penetration of generative AI. The darkest blue is jobs within that level of the organization that will be just automated away by AI. The next shade of blue, a little lighter, is the degree to which it'll be sped up by generative AI. Then you have tasks that AI, not clear whether it can be done at all by AI. And then you have tasks that we call non-language, that you've got to drive the truck still. You've got to you've got to stitch people's wounds still. AI is not going to do that for you. Now, there are a lot of organizational implications of this. Look at how often the individual contributor or entry-level position is going to get squeezed markedly. 3 or 4 things this suggests. Number one, retention is going to matter a whole lot more in the future than it has in the past, because you got to keep your 5-year-olds. And keeping your 5-year-olds is going to be as much a function of whether or not you're competing with people who are smart enough to start changing their personnel policies, starting with making caregiving more plausible for your employees, according to some of my other research. Because if they're not prepared, their only recourse is to steal your 5-year-olds. Another one is we're going to have to rethink training. We're in a situation now where the half-life of technology is beginning to approach the time it takes to learn the technology. We've never been even close to that. Historically, we've relied on people coming in our organization and learning how to do the job on the job. If it takes you so long to learn how to do the job with a technology that's going to change just as you get expert, that's not going to work anymore. So we're going to have to be much more adept at in situ training than we are now, both in terms of making it palatable and making it available and making it integral to learning. By the same token, the education system's never going to keep up with that pace of change in technology. It's not a go faster industry. So we're going to have to assess young, new employees much more through on-the-job observation. We're going to have to move to an experiential learning, work-based learning mode to see whether this candidate can come into our organization and be productive, an inversion of the way we've thought about skills acquisition in the past. There are some other differences I'd be happy to share with you in the break, but I'm out of time, and you can see all our research at our Managing the Future of Work project at Harvard Business School if you just Google us. Thanks.